class last week saying that we're expecting God to come next. After Job's words are ended, after Job indicts God one more time, one final time, the next character we expect on stage is God. But we are surprised and maybe even a little disappointed. This one person comes in out of nowhere as if walking on stage without a script and jumps right into the conversation that's been going on for 32 chapters. His entry surprised everyone for thousands of years. Scholars have tried to make sense of it for a long time, but he bursts in and has 159 uninterrupted verses. It's not that surprising then that he dubs himself the answerer. Nobody interrupts him, nobody refers to him. Next to Job, he has the most lines in the entire book. More lines than even God. So let's continue on as we think about what this character means. If you look in your handout, there's a great little blurb from Tom Long that Richard's going to explain to us.
Yeah, good morning. Does everybody have a handout? If not, there are some back there. And I'm trusting you can hear me okay. The sound is working. Great. Tom Long is a contemporary preaching professor. He teaches down at Candler, Emory University. He's been here as a Festival of Faith speaker. Some of you are nodding, remember. And he's actually going to be back here in February for our 175th anniversary. He's a great preacher. He has a funny 3 paragraphs on Elihu. And I thought I'd read those to you. As Jim just said, at this point, we are all expecting, we are all waiting for God to come on stage and answer Job. Job has said at the end of chapter 31, "Oh, that I had one to hear me. Here is my signature. Let the Almighty answer me." I've written out the bill of indictment. God, center stage is yours. Come on. And instead we get Elihu. And Tom Long writes this. As Job's words become more and more directed to the absent God, the friends become less and less pertinent to the drama. I think Jim talked last week about them almost going off into the shadows on the side of the stage. Everything is gathering itself for the inevitable divine appearance. But the author of Job has one more comedic surprise to spring. Job begs for the dark side of the stage to be filled with the light of God's presence. A timpani begins to roll in the orchestra pit. The string section vibrates excitedly. All eyes are directed with expectation toward the darkness. Suddenly a spotlight snaps on, and there, bathed in its light, is Elihu. A sigh of disappointment goes up from the audience, and it is well placed. Elihu is cradling his latest generation smartphone, and his designer jeans are so fashionably faded that they hide the fact that they come from Nordstrom's. He's young, and he makes a big deal of his youth. His beard is a failed attempt to disguise his youth. He knows this, and so he begins, "I am young, and you are old, so I was afraid to tell you what I think. But now that these 3 so-called sages have utterly failed, someone from my generation is just going to have to step in to straighten out this mess." Mustering all possible authority, Elihu continues, "I will not take sides in this debate. I'm not going to flatter one. All my words are sincere, and I am speaking the truth." It takes 6 windy chapters to speak this truth. And when all is said and done, Elihu has mostly repeated the same theological mellow bits we have already heard from the 3 friends. They are spoken, however, with all the self-congratulation of a person who has stumbled across a well-worn truism and believes that he is its first discoverer. Elihu is all wind-up and no pitch. As William Wheatby says, though there may be no fool like an old fool, Elihu, as a young fool, comes close.
Wow.
You all, if you want to get me in trouble, you can say this to Tom Long when he comes. But Tom Long has a gift of turning a phrase that I also see in Oscar Wilde. I mean, he can be so witty and so memorable that sometimes he obscures the deeper issues. And there are some deeper issues with Elihu here that I want to get into, though that is a wonderful way of presenting Elihu.
So, one thing first, I have to say this, Tom Long scene was wonderful, but there is something that makes me question how out of touch Tom Long is to think that a young hip person is looking for jeans at Nordstrom's. I thought that was a little odd. Amen from my... So that was one quick unimportant point. But the question we're forced to ask ourselves as we look at Elihu is, what's this doing here? What's this guy's purpose? Again, I say Elihu.
Yeah, because, if I just interrupt for a second.
Sure.
I mean, if he's just comedic relief, then we're forced to say, this is where I'm kind of faulting Long a little bit, why 6 chapters of the same thing over and over again if it's nothing but comedic relief? You could have done it in a chapter. And that's why I'm suggesting maybe it's more than that, though it may be that as well. So that's really our question. What's Elihu and his 6 chapters doing here in this book?
Sure, and that's what we're forced to ask ourselves. That's what people throughout history have been forced to ask themselves. The name Elihu in Hebrew actually means "my God is He," and that'll become important in a little bit here. And so I want to go over a few options that scholars throughout history have kind of tried to use to make sense of these few chapters that Elihu says. First off, just a quote from another scholar who I think gives us a good intro into looking at some options for what's Elihu doing here. She calls Elihu's words a deliberately generous curiosity. Maybe a nicer way of thinking about them than Tom Long's words.
It goes on a long time, yes.
Yeah. It goes on for a while. So Richard alluded to the first option already, and that is Elihu serves as comic relief, a way of easing the tensions in a difficult, kind of tense situation, kind of like the buffoon in an ancient Greek comedy, or the way Shakespeare uses the fool in his tragedies, a way of kind of lightening the mood, a way for the story to just kind of chill out for a little bit. Does that make sense? That's one way of thinking about it.
And in that way also to build suspense.
Build suspense.
The buffoon
sure.
and the fool do. If we're waiting for God to come, as we're laughing, we're also getting a little impatient. When is God going to come?
Sure. And a recent scholar who's kind of looked at all the options said, this is the best way, like the nicest, most fair way people have looked at the purpose of Elihu. So at best, Elihu's comic relief. At worst, Elihu is scriptural graffiti. This is kind of a mean phrase for Elihu. And one scholar says, it's like someone who has defaced a cultural monument with his graffiti and forever destroyed a part of the observer's satisfaction. Elihu's words are so unfocused and so distracting that it distracts the reader from paying attention, from being engaged to the story of Job. These few chapters that Elihu goes on for 159 verses, they're so distracting that they disengage the reader, that we're not able, the modern reader's not able to appreciate Job because Elihu's there. We would appreciate Job more if Elihu wasn't there. That's what some have said and have called it scriptural graffiti. Now, most have claimed that Elihu's a later edition. Does anyone have any good guesses why this might be a later edition? I know we haven't gone in the text much, but just curious what you all think. Does anyone have a good guess as to why Elihu might be later? Very good. Very good. Well, although we did just hear 3 straight chapters of Job speaking towards the end, but yeah, it is kind of breaking that one speaks, Job responds, the other speaks, Job responds. Good. Other thoughts?
Well, he may be able to solve the problem because he's thinking outside the box. Now, the reason he's thinking outside the box is he doesn't know what the box is. He has about 1 chance out of 100 to solve a problem, but it's worth the risk because he knows what
Sure, sure. That's a good point. We'll get to that when we get into the text more, I think. Yeah.
It is wild, but could it be a biblical fragment that scholars discovered subsequently and didn't know where to put it?
That could be true as well. Yeah. I want to ask another question. Has anyone, y'all are Job scholars now, so you're with Richard and I trying to interpret this text. I said this to you last week. We're all Job scholars together. Has anyone referred to Elihu yet? Has the narrator not referred to Job and his 3 friends? Who is this wild card guy? Was he just was he hiding in Bildad's luggage, or was he? Why has the narrator not observed or noticed this guy yet? So that's one reason people think it's a later edition, is nobody's talked to him yet, nobody's referred to him, and these 6 chapters where he speaks, nobody responds in the middle, and no one refers to him before or after he speaks.
Right.
And
that's pretty impressive. I mean, he comes on, makes these 6 chapters of speech, and nobody says a word about him afterwards.
Yeah.
Not God from the whirlwind, not Job.
Mm-hmm.
It's just if he was never there.
Yeah. Another important thing, remember I said his name means my God is he? He has a Hebrew name. He has an Israelite name. No other character yet in this book has an Israelite name. Every other person's name is a Gentile name, an Edomite name. They're all outsiders. And this guy has an Israelite name. It's another reason people have not been able to kind of put a sense onto why Job would be part of the original text. Now, I'm not saying all these things so we just disregard it. That is one way people have taken Elihu, is like, let's just skip over this. We got to get to the whirlwind. We got to get to God appearing. That's the good stuff, anyways. That's where the action is. We're not saying that. We wouldn't be spending a whole class on Elihu if we really thought that. I'm just saying these so we can think about how scholars have thought of it over time and kind of see some of the action, some of the things at work here. But the question Richard and I both want to ask you, and Richard and I will come out on this question in slightly different ways, but is there a way we can redeem these chapters? Is there another option for how these texts stand? Sorry, you have a question?
I'm thinking with those chapters have been a way of condensing what's said, or there have been something added later by Hebrew people to include this Gentile text into their book of scripture, because if I understand correctly, it's one of the earlier books that was written. So maybe it's something that they wanted to pull in when they were doing stuff. So they give stamp approval, put it illegally in there, who has a Hebrew name, and takes everything and just kind of, I can't think of the word, but kind of puts it all together.
Sure.
Summarizes what's going on with the whole book.
Yeah.
Wrote it in later to condense. Yeah, some people have thought that actually, and seen Elihu as condensing it down. That's another option we might get to later talking about, and kind of putting a Hebrew name on it would be almost highlighted for any Hebrew reader as saying, "Hey, this guy's one of us. Let's listen more closely to him." So some people have thought that the story of Job is an ancient Near East myth that has been repeated in Mesopotamia, in Syria. So other versions of the story existed before. So some people have used that to talk about Elihu maybe being the Hebrew stamp on this book. So that's a great option. And so that's one way of many we're going to talk about. We need to.
One more.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah. It would be like an author to give themselves the most verse, or almost the most verses. Yeah, wrote himself in. There you go.
Photoshop. Yeah. Okay.
Another question from a couple of weeks ago. The Dead Sea Scrolls got in the last chapter of Elihu's speech, verse 24.
Oh, that's a really good point.
The rest of it is Job be restored to health and wealth at the end. The rest of it is from God's speech.
Very interesting. Well, keep those things in mind. We need to move on so we can spend some time really diving into the text. But the question I want to leave us with as we go forward, and the way I want to think about this text as to a way to maybe redeem it, is what do Elihu's words teach us, if anything, about what is required of those who would be friends to the Jobs of this world? So maybe Elihu gives us another way of thinking about friendship in the book of Job. Remember how we had that whole lesson on friendship way back? The three friends kind of give us one way. Maybe Elihu gives us another way.